Hello, this is Jeff Walton from the Institute on Religion and Democracy in Washington, D.C. I'm joined today by Bishop Steve Wood of St. Andrew's Church in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. He also serves as diocesan bishop for the Anglican Church in North America's Diocese of the Carolinas. Welcome, Bishop Wood.
Thank you, Jeff. Good to be with you.
Your parish was prominent in the Anglican realignment. Additionally, a large portion of the St. Andrew's Church building caught fire and burned about 2 years ago and is currently amidst construction. And you were recently discharged from the hospital after treatment for COVID-19. So it's been a challenging few years, it would seem.
It has been. It has really been a challenging few years. Throw in a couple other small fires that we had on site and 2 hurricanes, and it's been challenging. But in the fire, we really felt that the Lord had given us a text from Isaiah, that he brings beauty out of ashes. And that has been something we have held on to the past 2 years, both corporately, but even personally, as I was in the ICU the last few weeks.
For those who aren't familiar with this, the Charleston Post and Courier did an extensive piece on your treatment, and I will post that in the comments below where people can access and read that profile. After there was that fire 2 years ago, the day after, you were literally walking through the ashes of the ministry center, and you made that reference that you just referred to about God bringing beauty out of ashes. Since that time, how have you seen that played out?
It began immediately with people's generosity. I mean, we were receiving, local churches were sending us checks. One parish, the one local Catholic church, sent their entire Sunday offering to us. Churches across the country, people across the country just immediately began sending in checks, which was completely unexpected. We had nowhere to go. You know, the staff was homeless because all of our offices burned down as well. And local churches began opening up meeting space for us so we could meet in their space. Whole Foods opened up their community meeting room to us and let us meet at their Whole Foods meeting room. Parishioners began opening their homes, and life went on. You know, a lot of our programming, Alpha, children's ministry, youth ministry, they were being done in parishioner homes, in office space that people had made available to us. So almost from day one, we began to see God doing something extraordinary with this. And it's continued. The generosity of people, you know, at the end of the day, this will probably be a $15 million rebuild. And we had an extraordinary capital campaign. And people's generosity has been encouraging and moving. So, and always surprised, you know. We've got new members that have come in the last 2 years that we realized something or learned something. We were meeting at a local elementary school, and we made an announcement that new members classes would be back at the main campus. And we had a couple emails from people saying, "What's the main campus?" And they had no idea that we even existed prior to meeting in this elementary school. So we've seen a lot of really, really good things come through this, and it's made our congregation closer. And it deepened our faith.
There were, in addition to your diagnosis with coronavirus, you had a couple other staff who were also affected, and I believe a lay delegate to a diocesan meeting also. Yep. Fortunately, they didn't have the extent of the treatment that you necessitated, but my understanding was you were on a ventilator for about 10 days?
Yep, I was on a ventilator 10 days. It was a little angst-producing experience. I went in on a Thursday having difficulty breathing, and fairly quickly they did chest X-rays and said, and I was waiting the results on a COVID test, and they said the X-rays were fairly conclusive that I had COVID, and they started treating me with oxygen, but I kept going through I was going through all the different levels. They were trying up in the oxygen level, different kind of nose pieces. And finally they put me on something called a non-rebreather. My wife's a nurse, and so no one was allowed in with you, right? So when you go into the hospital now, no visitors for anybody. But I had FaceTimed her from the emergency room, and she saw the kind of mask I had on, and she knew that it wasn't good. And they came in that night and said, we're probably going to put you on a ventilator tomorrow. And I think at the time I'd seen some of the news that said people that go on ventilators have a 50-50 chance. And so I was aware of that. And I have 4 boys. I talked to my wife, but I have 4 boys, and called each one of them individually, told them I loved them, told them that I was proud of the men that they had become, proud of their families, prayed with each one of them, and then went on a ventilator.
That's really surprising for a lot of us, because the image we've been presented with of the typical COVID-19 patient is that they're usually much older. You're in your 50s.
Yep.
The typical COVID patient usually has a series of comorbidities, which you've been in good health. Is there a sense of, obviously no one expected to get this, but
right.
Is there a sense of sort of testing amidst this time?
Yeah. I've never been a why me, Lord kind of person. I'm more of a why not me. It's going to happen. I don't believe that God promises to spare his people from these kinds of things. Paul tells us in Romans that God's ways are inscrutable. We certainly see that there are times when we have experiences of severe mercy from the Lord. And it was, yes, it was challenging, particularly 10 days I was obviously heavily sedated to the extent of being out. That's had physical consequences, as I've had significant weight loss and muscle atrophy, and now have pretty extensive physical therapy, occupational therapy I have to participate in. But it has deepened my faith. I can definitely say there were times in the ICU, particularly late at night, I was in a lot of pain. I felt more like I'd been in a car accident than anything, because every part of my body hurt. I couldn't get comfortable. At one point, I took the sheets off my bed and laid them on the floor because I wanted, and laid on the floor with my knees bent just because I needed something solid. The nurse saw me, made me get back in bed. But it was difficult. It was lonely. Especially, you don't see anybody, and everyone you see is in hazmat, double gloved, all you can see are eyes. Got a very different insight into pastoral ministry. I've always been on the caregiver side in the hospital. I've not been hospitalized before. And, 16 days in round 1, then I was readmitted last week into the ICU because people with COVID have become hypercoagulable. And they found 2 blood clots in my leg. And so I was readmitted, and that was back in ICU for another 4 days. And again, back with hazmat things. And because I had not yet tested negative for COVID. I did at the end of my stay, but at the beginning, I had not yet tested negative. And long nights. And, but it's interesting how much goes through your mind, scripture that I have hidden away. I've encouraged people, I think every clergy person encourages people to read scripture and memorize it. And I'm thankful for a lifetime of that. I went to a Missouri Synod grade school where we started memorizing a Bible verse a week starting in kindergarten. And Luther's catechism, 7th and 8th grade, we had to memorize most of Luther's small catechism. And it was fascinating and comforting how much of that came back to me. When I had no Bible, I had my iPhone, but my dexterity was completely gone. I couldn't get a fork to my mouth, let alone try to type on my iPhone. And Siri didn't recognize my voice because the intubation changed the quality of my voice. And so it was purely what was memory, hymns, scripture, poetry. A lot of those things really helped me during that time.
What are you telling to your clergy and to other bishops in the ACNA about ministry to people who are undergoing COVID-19 treatment now that you've gone through it?
Yeah, I haven't. This is really one of the first conversations I've had. I've been on home rest. I'm just getting my strength back, just starting to feel more like myself. I've had a couple conversations with some clergy. I've encouraged them to take advantage of technology. You know, I had my phone with me, and while I didn't have the manual dexterity to reply to text messages, I got them. It was very encouraging. I had a handful of friends that would text me every morning at about 6 o'clock because they wanted me to see them a text when I woke up. And so I'd wake up usually a handful of text messages with a Bible verse or a quote from a hymn or a praise song or some kind of word of encouragement. And so, so while COVID patients are, all patients right now are isolated, right? Hospitals aren't letting any visitors in for anybody. Take advantage of technology, text messages. And even I had a couple friends that work night shifts, and they would text me at 3 a.m. because they knew I wasn't sleeping well. And so I'd hear that ping sometimes when I was awake, and there'd be hey, Steve, I'm praying for you. Lord brought you to mind. Those are very encouraging things. I think the second thing I really encourage folks is to take it seriously. Many people don't know anyone that's had COVID, but I've heard from a number of people in the Charleston area that when I got it, it became real for people here. It was also an odd thing. Every time the parish, I didn't know that the Post and Courier had written a number of stories on me being intubated and in the hospital. The final story was a much larger piece with a bigger picture and the recovery aspect. But I also know that every time the parish sent out an update, the local news channels broadcasted on their 6 and 11 o'clock news programs, which I'm fairly private for being a public person. And it was a little uncomfortable, personal, but I also am aware from a number of people that it made this real. And so I've encouraged bishops, clergy, you know, take it seriously because I mean, I can't even begin to tell you how I'm guessing I got it at Synod, and that we got it at Synod, but I was social distance. I mean, I was at that time, social distance was 3 feet. And if I shook anybody's hand, I had Purell in my pocket. Every time I shook a hand, I Purelled. And I was stunned that I got diagnosed with this because I thought I had done everything possible to not get it. And so, you know, as we start to reopen, we start thinking about social distancing, 6 feet, you know, what do we do about singing? Just very practical questions because I thought I'd been pretty careful and I still got it. So, yeah, it's been, you know, I've been out. April 3rd was my first discharge. And that's starting to feel like a little while ago compared to April, compared to March 1st. I'm about 50% of what I used to be, but getting there.
That's good to know. St. Andrew's is a pretty large parish for those who aren't familiar with it. When it was part of the Episcopal Church, I believe it was the 7th largest parish by attendance. Yep. And it is now a multi-site congregation. So you're well resourced, but at the same time, you also have an extraordinary number of ministries. What do you think the next steps are as you both come through the COVID-19 season and also complete the construction of the building, which I think is slated for July?
Yeah, God willing, we should be open, reopen the new ministry center on July 24th. I don't think clergy offices will be finished by then, but that's okay. We need the ministry center and the day school piece open. But we should be ready to go. So immediate challenges have been all of our campuses meet in schools, and schools are shut down and are probably going to remain closed well into the summer. And so we're having to negotiate, where do we worship? We're working, you know, we're carefully reading CDC guidelines, White House guidelines, state and local guidelines on how we address this and how we move forward. Looking at issues of social distancing and what that looks like in our church. So, you know, is it every other pew that we're seating? So we're actually sketching some of that out. We're looking at outdoor worship venues, obviously weather permitting. But I'm anticipating that, and actually a letter will be coming out from the bishops of the Carolinas to our clergy. We've already notified them via email, but we're going to give a written letter with some guidelines. But we've recommended no indoor worship gatherings prior to June 1st across the Carolinas. And that probably last week of May, we'll assess that to see where things stand. We're going to be very interested. We're watching Georgia and Texas very closely because they were two of the earliest states to open. And by the end of May, beginning of June, we should begin to get some data on whether they're having a rebound or some kind of spike because of social distancing guidelines being lessened and life resuming. And so as we get that kind of data, that will help inform us on what we do with our own parish reopening, but also diocesan reopening.
Great. Well, thanks so much for that. I really appreciate this, and I know that the viewers of this will really appreciate hearing from you. Your story is in some ways surprising and certainly unexpected, but thanks so much for also sharing about this concept that God shares about God bringing beauty out of ashes, and looking forward to the things that we don't see that God has providentially kind of sown amidst the season.
Yeah. Well, you know, a side note, you know, we'd never, ever considered live streaming, but a segment of our congregation that we had not anticipated hearing from, particularly those in long-term nursing care and homebound, have emailed and called us to say how thrilled they were because it helps them feel connected to the church again, that they haven't been able to attend services in ages. And here it is now. They can get it on computer. And so it's actually causing us to reevaluate, is live streaming something we're going to continue for the sake of the shut-ins and the homebound that we have and the nursing home that we have. So,
yeah, that's
again,
something
I'm anticipating a lot of discoveries like that to come out of this. Again, ways in which God does new things, interesting things that are a blessing to people.
Yeah, I was very surprised at my own congregation when we had our first online worship, which was through Zoom. We're about 60 to 80 on a Sunday since we're a church plant. So we're small enough that we can do web conferencing. But we were delighted to see people who had been a part of our congregation that now live overseas call in and join us.
Yeah,
so we had a family from Jordan that was on the line, people from Seattle and other places that were calling into our relatively small Anglican church plant in suburban Virginia. So that was a bit of a surprise.
It's pretty neat. That's neat.
Well, thanks so much for taking some time out of your afternoon.
Delighted.
We appreciate it. And I'll upload this, and I hope that you have a really good day.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate your work. And Mark, what you do at the IRD is invaluable. It's a great resource to the church. I'm grateful and pleased to be part of this.
Thanks so much, Bishop. We really appreciate your ministry as well. Have a good day.